Haruto is a disgusting, pathetic, useless kid whose father experimented on him when he was a kid in order to give him godlike powers. In the year 71 of the royal calendar, humanity aims to conquer the entire universe. They have managed to build Dyson spheres, called modules, around the sun, thus transferring 70% of Earth's population there. Haruto is a boy living in Module 77. He has a good heart, but is known for disliking competition, especially when competing against Shoko, his best friend and the girl he's in love with. However, there's a big secret about Haruto that not even he knows. He was used in experiments by a group that controlled the world from the shadows called Magius. They were beings from another plane who lacked a physical form and sought to attain one through the Valvraves. Until then, his school life was that of a normal boy. He went to school to learn, but his classmates preferred to talk about the war between the countries of Dorsha and Eris. Haruto belonged to Jor, a neutral federation that claimed not to care about the war. They were only concerned with secretly advancing their technology. After class, Shoko and Haruto go to fetch the equipment to clean the classroom. Shoko asks why Haruto lost to her in the last competition. Haruto explains that he wishes to live in a world where there are no winners or losers, where all human beings are treated more equally. However, a boy from a group of newly transferred students overhears this and becomes irritated. This student snatches the key from Haruto's hand, causing him to stumble to the ground. The new student says that Haruto has a fool's dream because there will always be people willing to take everything he has, and without the willingness to fight, Haruto won't be able to protect anything he considers important. The student then leaves, and Haruto, thinking he acted correctly, decides to help his classmates clean a temple while discussing what happened. He ends up knocking over a plaque with a love message. Shoko approaches and tells him about a legend concerning the temple. If you confess your feelings there, you will be loved by the person you like. Haruto realizes this is a sign and decides to man up. She calls him by his name, becoming extremely embarrassed. She never imagined he would have the courage to take this step. Trying to calm her racing heart, she encourages him to continue. He is about to make the biggest mistake of his life when Module 77 is attacked by Dorsha forces, who believe Jor possesses a secret weapon and want to steal it. Everyone panics. It's the first time they've witnessed a real battle. Haruto realizes he needs to save Shoko and the others. They start running toward a shelter building, but the forces of Dorsha begin destroying everything, including the school. Suddenly, the ground starts to shake, and Haruto notices a gigantic robot emerging from the pool. The whole group stops running to observe the robot, but Shoko notices someone unconscious inside a car. She runs to help that person, but Haruto tells her no, they need to leave and protect themselves. Shoko ignores his words and keeps running. At that moment, a Dorsha ship misses a shot aimed at a defensive Jor robot, hitting the spot where Shoko was. Haruto recovers, quickly gets up, and starts running. He looks everywhere but can't find Shoko. He thinks she's playing hide and seek, but his classmates try to convince him to leave. They know she's dead. They need to get out of there. He begins to scream, unable to contain the pain in his heart. But more than pain, he feels hatred. The same boy who said he didn't want to hurt anyone now wants revenge against those who took something important from him, just as the transferred student had said moments before. He climbs into the robot and presses the button to activate what is called Valvrave on the monitor. The robot begins to activate, standing up. But Haruto doesn't know how to operate it. He presses buttons, manipulates the joysticks, but the robot doesn't move. The forces of Dorsha start concentrating their attacks on Haruto's robot. After all, this is the secret weapon they are seeking. They know the robot has been activated and need to remove the pilot. Haruto panics. He can't do anything. He wanted to avenge Shoko's death, but he can't even do that. Suddenly, her words about why he doesn't try to win echo in his mind. At that moment, he opens his eyes and notices a message on the screen. There's only one way to control this robot. If Haruto desires revenge, he needs to do something. He needs to abandon his humanity. It's then that he understands that sometimes the only option is to fight. Without hesitation, he presses yes. The robot completes activation, but first injects something into Haruto's neck. Now, with the robot's power, Haruto advances against the commander and all the soldiers of the invading unit, eliminating them one by one without difficulty, leaving the commander for last. The soldier tries to hit him with a surprise shot, but Haruto dodges and then launches an attack with a mysterious energy in the form of a double slash. The soldier blocks the attack, but in doing so, Haruto moves to the side and quickly surprises him from behind, cutting his ship in half and making it explode in the air, winning the battle. He lands the robot and realizes what just happened. He managed to defeat the enemy. However, he can only shed tears for Shoko. With a shattered heart, Haruto exits the robot and tries to return to his classmates. Suddenly, he sees the newly transferred student walking toward him. Haruto recognizes that his worldview was childish. Now he knows that sometimes it's necessary to compete and fight. He wants to know the name of this new classmate. The classmate introduces himself as L-Elf, a member of Dorsha's special forces. Haruto is shocked, but at that moment, L-Elf stabs him in the heart. L-Elf and his companions are all members of Dorsha's special forces, and they infiltrated the school to steal that robot and use it in the war. L-Elf then throws Haruto's body to the ground and fires 2 shots to ensure his death. He heads toward the robot and prepares to enter it. At that instant, he feels something strange on his back. He turns around and sees Haruto, with strange marks on his face, who bites him on the neck. Having been executed by L-Elf in their previous encounter, he rises and loses control of his consciousness, biting L-Elf and mysteriously taking over the body of an enemy. His friends come to the rescue, but only find L-Elf and Haruto's body lying on the ground. Out of nowhere, the group is surprised by the same invading force from Dorsha, who point their weapons at them, demanding they step away from the weapon. However, Haruto was actually controlling L-Elf's body. Not understanding what was happening, Haruto decides to launch a surprise attack and fires his weapon at the enemy group. After an exchange of gunfire, he reunites with his friends to try to explain that he is Haruto in the enemy's body. The group then decides to recover his original body somehow. From there, he coldly kills anyone who stands in his way, recovers his original body and the Valvrave he had used, and ties up L-Elf's body, placing it in his cockpit. His friend Rukino also enters the cockpit to help him. The Valvrave doesn't function without Haruto being in his own body, but he doesn't know how to return to normal. Rukino suggests that he bite his own body as he did with L-Elf, because that's how it happens in anime. Haruto follows her suggestion and indeed returns to his body. He tries to return to combat to drive the Dorshan fleets away from the area, but ends up falling into the sea after being hit. At the bottom, he discovers there was a compartment that led straight to outer space, but being thrown there, he is surprised by a barrage of shots. He regains control of the combat after being hit a few times, not expecting that kind of offensive, and charges forward at high speed, cutting one of the ships in half with his scythe in a downward attack. Taking advantage of the same movement, he makes another quick slash, but now from bottom to top, finishing off the third. He tries to attack the next one in the same way, but the ship blocks his slash using a shield. Removing this shield from his path, the ship attempts a surprise attack with a cannon, but he dodges to the side, seizing the opening and ending the fight by striking a kick to its head. A weapon called Ideal from the Dorshan army is sent to confront him, firing missiles from 6 different directions that home in on the Valvrave. He tries to escape the attack, but is still hit a few times because he didn't expect that kind of offense. In the middle of the confrontation, Shoko calls him, and he discovers that she had survived and feels relieved by the news. But L-Elf unties himself from the ropes inside the Valvrave's cockpit, pointing a gun at his friend Rukino. Haruto hears L-Elf's companions calling him a traitor because of what had happened after he took control of the boy's body and shot at them, which they didn't know about. He tries to talk to L-Elf while the Valvrave is hit multiple times, causing it to start overheating. Not knowing what could happen if it reached its limit, the boy decides to risk everything while trying to resolve the situation. Letting the engine overheat, he pilots the mecha to draw his sword and stabs it into his own core. This ends up transferring that energy to his blade, and he pulls it out. This releases a long-distance energy slash at the 2 enemy ships. Meanwhile, the Eris fleet appears in the combat, forcing Dorsha to retreat. Haruto returns to the school and reunites with Shoko, but remembering that he turned into a monster when he lost consciousness, he decides to run away from her. On the following day, he gathers with some friends, trying to explain that something is now wrong with his body. He shows them that he now possesses almost immediate regeneration, which is why he survived the shots he took. But once again, he loses consciousness and attacks his friends. They manage to calm him down before he hurts anyone. Moments later, he is invited by the Eris minister for a private conversation. He discovers that he has the support of all the Eris countries, becoming a symbol of the fight against Dorshan tyranny, even earning the nickname, the boy who fought against the world. Wanting to avoid another direct confrontation, it is decided that they will evacuate the entire area with the help of Eris forces. Haruto encounters L-Elf accompanied by some agents who decide to interrogate the boy after hearing his name. But before leaving, L-Elf says the following words as if they were a prophecy. In short, he says that at 3:14 p.m. there will be an earthquake and panic will fill the area, and Haruto's answer to solve his problems will appear just behind him. He ponders this while watching the agents take L-Elf to one of their ships for questioning. Trying to understand what L-Elf had told him, he goes on his way and begins to follow the evacuation instructions proposed by Eris, helping the last people inside the buildings to leave the area. After almost everyone is ready to leave Module 77, he realizes he is holding a loudspeaker, just as L-Elf had mentioned. He hears explosions beginning to occur, also causing an earthquake. Amid all that chaos, the students and his friends start to panic, seeing that everything is happening in the exact order that L-Elf had warned. He decides to look at the clock beside him, noticing that it is exactly 3:14 p.m. This prompts him to look back at that very moment, and he comes face to face with L-Elf, who emerges from the shadows, knocking out one of his friends, Yamada. L-Elf, who had somehow managed to escape from Eris, tries to make a deal with him, saying that his greatest desire is actually to bring revolution to Dorsha, revealing that he has rebelled against his own army. Haruto refuses the invaders' proposal, saying he will resolve everything on his own, and L-Elf leaves his sight, stating that when he changes his mind, he should signal with his hand. With no time to lose, Haruto runs to try to understand why the earthquakes are happening and encounters the Eris minister. Upon speaking with him, he discovers that Eris had decided to steal the Valvrave from Jor and abandon all the students, resulting in him being tied up and locked in a room. But Shoko appears, rescuing her friend and explaining that she had tried to call him, and since he didn't answer, she realized something was off. The minister, losing control of the situation, draws a machine gun while boarding his escape ship. However, now free, he manages to recover the Valvrave and prevents their escape, threatening to hand over the weapons to Dorsha if Eris doesn't assist them in the battle occurring in space. With that, he rushes to the front lines and begins shooting down several ships in the blink of an eye, buying time against the enemy army. He initiates his evacuation plan by destroying the bridges that connect his module to the sphere and successfully pushing it away from the location. The students discuss Eris, which also displayed bad intentions, aiming only to acquire the Valvraves to enter into total war against Dorsha. But now they saw a third nation, a very small one that emerged in the midst of two world powers, challenging them head-on. Haruto sees his classmates, who were taking math tests with him just last week, now representing their country diplomatically, with his friend Shoko leading the way. They officially declare national sovereignty, showing that Jor would be an independent nation from that moment on. The country of Jor, now governed by students, soon faces its first problem as a nation. The local electricity suddenly stops working, and they realize that life won't be easy since everything now depends on the students to resolve. Even with all this pressure, they manage to unite forces to prove that they are truly capable of fulfilling their words and promises. They show that despite the difficulties, they can still handle everything that comes their way together. Having witnessed the devastation of war destroying families and the lives of loved ones, he promises to do everything in his power to prevent it from happening again. With everyone's help, the country succeeds in raising donations from various nations, thanks to an idea from his friend Inuzuka. They decide to film parts of their territory's interior. They wanted to show the world that even though they were devastated, these people were still standing tall, bravely facing attacks from an enemy much larger and better prepared than they were, transforming themselves into a universal symbol of hope for everyone watching around the world. As this lighter atmosphere returns, so does the electricity, allowing him to descend underground with some colleagues to try to find more things that might be there. To their surprise, they discover that, in fact, there were more hidden Valvraves. Upon encountering the weapons of war, he asks his friend Rukino not to tell anyone about their discovery. However, she surprises him with a kiss, leaving him bewildered because he didn't understand what was happening. Only afterward does he realize that she took advantage of his distraction to enter one of the Valvraves. He tries to persuade her not to enter the cursed machine, saying he would protect everyone by himself. But she reveals that deep down, she has always wanted to be recognized by everyone, to be someone famous and important. She believes her existence would disappear from the world if she couldn't etch her name into history. Without time for a truce, a new attack from Dorsha occurs. The two head to the front lines, and the girl, eager to show the world who she is, moves ahead of him, surprising Dorsha because they thought there was only one such weapon. With great skill piloting the Valvrave, she single-handedly takes down several enemy ships with ease. However, Dorsha had prepared a more effective long-range attack this time. Haruto is hit by some missiles launched by one of the ideals, which prevent him from approaching easily. He tries to reach the ships, but realizes that his friend has stopped supporting him. She has frozen on the battlefield, leaving him at a complete disadvantage. Shoko, displaying her leadership spirit, contacts them via radio transmission. She asks Rukino why she is standing still on the main stage, just when the whole world is pausing to watch what she will do, saying exactly what her friend needs to hear to take action. Motivated, Rukino returns to combat, charging at the ships that had Haruto cornered. Together, they achieve victory for their small and brave country, and he realizes that perhaps he doesn't really need to fight alone. Upon returning to their base, Elf appears moments later by hacking into the school's communication system, announcing that he has taken control of the place for himself. Hearing this, Haruto heads toward his mecha again, but is surprised by Elf, who was already waiting for him there in advance. Elf tries to persuade him once more to accept his proposal, but Adre, who had infiltrated the location in pursuit of his former ally, appears wanting to understand the reasons behind Elf's betrayal. A shootout begins, and one of the shots hits Haruto squarely in the chest, causing him to lose consciousness. He is subsequently crushed by a steel beam, rendering him unable to stand. The invaders reveal that they are not alone. An entire fleet is already prepared to attack again. This prompts Rukino to go outside the module to protect themselves. She manages to execute some boosts using her own energy and attacks, launching iron wheels that end up exploding some of the enemy ships. However, she realizes that it was all a trap when magnetic fixation boomerangs surround her, overloading her Valvrave and immobilizing it. Haruto wakes up to find himself trapped under beams, with Elf by his side. Elf tells him that even though he's pinned down, he could still take control of his body again to fight. Seeing no other choice but to cooperate with Elf, Haruto decides to follow his plan so they won't be destroyed together right there. Biting Elf and taking over his body, Haruto runs to his robot, where he finds notes written on pieces of paper by Elf. The notes detail the weapons Dorsha would use and how their soldiers would act, information that helps him handle the confrontation in the most effective way possible. With a plan in mind, he targets the ship that was firing the boomerangs, entering into direct confrontation with H-Noon. He successfully destroys the boomerang device, once again winning the third battle against the world power, which decides to retreat yet again. Meanwhile, Inuzuka had gone to search for his friend among the rubble and finds Haruto's unconscious body on the ground, realizing that he had probably switched bodies with someone else again. But then, Inuzuka comes across Aina's floating corpse. She had been caught in the crossfire of the last confrontation. The sight of his dear friend lifeless causes him to enter a complete state of shock. After waiting for a moment to talk to him, Inuzuka confronts Haruto, grabbing the collar of his shirt angrily while trying to hold back his tears of pain, asking why he didn't protect her. Completely devastated, Haruto falls to his knees on the ground, screaming, revealing that, in fact, that victory still left a bitter taste of defeat. To make matters worse, Dorsha, who had managed to infiltrate before all this happened, reveals that they had also taken some photos of the location, obtaining the information that there were actually 5 Valvraves in total stationed in Jor. Elf, who after this combat had been captured and imprisoned by the students of Jor, tells them that their country has exactly 6 hours before it is completely destroyed, and that he is still awaiting Takashima Haruto's definitive answer about the two of them cooperating, promising to save the place from the next Dorshan attack. The attack that Elf had warned about finally happens. Haruto, alongside Rukino, shows that both are managing to use their weapons more effectively in battle. But he quickly realizes that this fight doesn't seem to be heading toward a happy ending, as his system had already been overloaded from the battle in space while things worsened in the module. This was because Dorsha had actually regrouped some of their best soldiers for an armed confrontation, not in space but on solid ground. They managed to invade the location while the Valvraves were occupied elsewhere, along with 3 more of their main ships. They take control of the battle by invading with a ship full of heavily armed soldiers, ambushing Jor in yet another tactical trap. Not knowing how to act in this situation, Haruto contacts his base, asking to speak with Elf. Needing a plan to deal with everything, he decides to accept the agreement made earlier, saying that he doesn't want to lose any more close friends or be forced to see friends suffer from the losses of loved ones who could have been saved by him but weren't. With the alliance formed, Elf is ready to provide support in the ongoing battle. After hearing Haruto's speech, he now seems to have a certain admiration for the student and promises that he can win that battle without losing even a single soldier. Elf then begins giving instructions over the phone, telling Haruto to aim his weapon at one of the lower entrances of Module 77, which, if destroyed, would send the Module C out into space. Haruto follows his instructions and expels the water into space, which freezes and deactivates Dorsha's magnetic weapons. Moreover, this action simultaneously gets rid of the warships that were bombing the city. With the battle suddenly turning around, his new companion appears at his side in space, taking the opportunity to launch a surprise attack with a ship, while Haruto warns that his entire system is already overloaded. Hearing more instructions from his base, they provide coordinates of the target that Haruto needs to hit with his next attack, while Elf helps him by directly fighting against one of his former comrades, trying to create a gap in their defenses and buying more time for Haruto to act without worry. Haruto, with the overload ready, prepares his strongest attack by placing his sword into the core to transfer energy to it, performing a heavy slash from top to bottom that causes a destructive yellow energy wave, hitting the entire fleet in the blink of an eye. With that, they win yet another battle, and Haruto rescues his new ally who was floating in the void, showing that they could count on each other from then on. Due to Aina's death, his friend can no longer think about anything but revenge, which worries him. Shoko also mentions that Inuzuka liked her and that the two spent a lot of time together, causing Haruto to fully understand the anger Inuzuka feels, having experienced it himself before because of what happened to Shoko. A new offensive is launched by Dorsha, who now, instead of engaging in direct confrontation against the Valvraves or a ground invasion, decide to attack first with long-range weapons, firing some cannon shots at the upper part of the module. But they are surprised when they realize that the defense of the place is now extremely well organized, which will make things difficult for their army. During the confrontation, Dorsha manages to carry out a successful attack on the location while simultaneously luring Haruto and Rukino away from their base by pretending to retreat after being surprised by the defenses, thus regaining control of the battle before them. This happens because the barrier system that had been set up in Module 77 had overloaded the local power generators, disabling their defenses. Without a plan to follow, the students are forced to use more of the Valvraves from their base. Inuzuka and Yamada are chosen to be the new pilots. They enter the battle and change the course of the confrontation. While Yamada is extremely aggressive, Inuzuka possesses strong defensive capabilities, making the duo extremely problematic for Dorsha. The army fires a shot from their main cannon, but it ends up not being enough to surpass the student's shield, who returns all that massive energy back to the enemy ship. Inuzuka, remembering the death of his dear friend, promises that he will not lose anyone else, winning the confrontation alongside his new companion, Yamada. With the end of the battle, everyone gathers again, and Haruto returns to his base to see that his friends are now piloting the same demonic weapons as he is, which doesn't please him at all, because he is losing consciousness more frequently and attacking anyone who is nearby as a result. Haruto believes this is due to the side effects caused by the Valvraves. He confronts Elf because he doesn't want to see that happening to other people. But Inuzuka manages to calm him down, saying that all of this had actually been his own choice, and that he would deal with any consequences that might arise. He and Rukino meet with their two new companions and begin explaining to the group of pilots the secrets they knew about the weapons. They hear over the school's general communication system that Eris, during these days, was still trying to persuade the country of Jor to participate in some international events. They requested that Jor's representative meet them at the lunar base, a place where a non-aggression agreement among humans existed. Discovering that Jor had decided to go to the moon and that an election would be held, the group comments that if one of them were in power, it would be easier to keep information about the weapons secret. The boy decides to talk to Elf about this to find out if it was part of his plan, but he discovers that it wasn't. With that, he leaves the place via the elevator, encountering a classmate, and ends up losing control again. Rukino appears, kicking him in the stomach and calling him a pervert, intending to hide that side effect from the other students. The two go outside to discuss what they would do if his condition worsened even more, until they bump into Shoko, who was under pressure from the students to become the representative, even against her will. Knowing his friend well, he notices that she seemed bothered by something but wasn't telling anyone. Later, noticing that she had also isolated herself toward the end of the afternoon, he decides to look for her after talking with one of her friends named Marie, who was worried about Shoko. Upon finding her, he discovers that she was secretly suffering while listening to her friend's requests for her to participate in the elections. She explains that she couldn't stop thinking about her father, who had been captured by Dorsha at the beginning of the war because he was actually the former minister of Jor. This made her wonder every day if he was still alive in their hands. Seeing his friend go through all that alone, he realizes his foolishness and begins to blame himself for not having stopped to notice that someone so important needed his support in something so obvious. He promises that he will rescue her father no matter what it costs, accidentally letting slip that she is one of the most important people in his life, and because of that, he couldn't stand by without acting a phrase that ends up calming her. She decides to run to be the minister in her father's place, trusting in his promise to rescue him. After that, he decides to isolate himself again instead of going to watch her speech on the school stage because he felt he would lose control of his consciousness again that day. Rukino, who was looking for her friend, appears, and he attacks her this time, even more out of control. She realizes that it wasn't the boy doing this, but something akin to a curse. Deciding she needed to help her ally alleviate his suffering somehow, she allows him to harm her body until his frenzy subsides. Completely traumatized by what he had done the previous day, he asks to talk with his friend. They go to the cinema, where Rukino implies that she has always been a lonely person. Hearing this, he tells her that she doesn't need to feel that way anymore, because now she has companions and him by her side. But at that moment, their conversation is interrupted by a new attack from Dorsha that is taking place. They go into space together, listening to their base's strategy over the communication radio. Instead of engaging in combat with Dorsha, they decide to change their module's route immediately toward the moon to try to avoid direct confrontation. However, the enemy army doesn't let them escape, breaking the original formation of their combat ships to pursue them in space, forcing the Valvrave team to face them directly. All of this had actually been anticipated by their base under Elf's command. He had informed the boy that if the ships aligned themselves, he could destroy them all in a single attack using the overload power of his sword. He then waits for the right moment to act and announces that he's ready to attack with the overload after waiting for some time. Without thinking twice, he decimates the entire Dorshan fleet in a single slash. With Elf's plan well executed, they thought they had won the battle. But Kane, the enemy commander, had decided to personally go in a smaller ship to Module 77, showing that the battle was not yet over, and that this would be his last effort to obtain the Valvraves. Haruto quickly returns inside the module and sees Kane reaching the location where the weapons were stored, thanks to the photos his army had taken earlier. The captain shoots at him, and Haruto is unable to defend himself. Kane easily overpowers Elf in hand-to-hand combat, demonstrating that no matter how exceptionally skilled the young man was, he still couldn't defeat the person who had taught him everything. Kane then takes both of them hostage, forcing them to merely watch the ensuing confrontation. In space, the battle against the Valvrave team continues. Dorsha finds a way to overheat Jor's robots even faster, which ends up disabling 3 of them at once. Akira, one of the students who isolated herself from everyone else, decides to emerge from her hiding place to try to help. She spent all day on her computer, hacking into the school's system. Witnessing what's happening, she decides to take one of the Valvraves to help Shoko survive, as Shoko was her only friend, and she didn't want to lose her without doing anything. The girl starts frantically pressing buttons, trying to get a weapon to fire, and discovers that it is actually equipment that can be used to hack enemy systems. Using her new weapon, she infiltrates the Dortian system and takes control of the enemy ships, single-handedly changing the course of the battle. By doing this, the ships that had entered the module begin exploding in the air, causing widespread chaos. Elf seizes this moment of distraction to grab Haruto and float toward the Valvrave so they can get away from Kane, who had captured them moments earlier and was forcing them to watch the module's destruction. The two recover the Valvrave and decide to shoot at Kane in a way that he wouldn't be able to survive. But even after hitting him directly, Kane, for some reason, was not killed. He begins to emit an unknown green energy, and strange sounds start coming from his mouth that don't seem human. He then floats through the air and reaches one of Jor's Valvraves, successfully capturing it, activating the weapon with his own mysterious energy. He reveals that he is actually part of a group called Magius, an alien race that aims to rule not just Earth, but the entire universe from the shadows. Seeing that someone needed to stop Kane, Haruto charges at the leader of the enemy army, and the fight continues between the two. He fires his cannon at the soldier, but unable to land any shots, he ends up taking a direct hit to the stomach from crystallized green energy. He then tries to throw his scythe with a chain attached to its handle to trap the robot's arms and pull him closer, shortening the distance between them and allowing him to use his sword more effectively. But his opponent conjures two more limbs of pure energy, showing that he used the Valvraves as if they were an extension of his own body. Even though he had acquired the machine just minutes ago, Kane grabs and throws the boy to another part of the module, then grabs his leg and tears it off. At a disadvantage, Haruto presses a button inside the module that attaches one of Yamada's armored arms to his own mecha. He fires a surprise long-range attack at the soldier, then advances, trying to grab the captain, who manages to hold his arm and push him back. Losing balance after that, he is immobilized again. The boy ejects his scythe, hitting Kane's neck. Kane retaliates by causing an explosion around his body, pushing Haruto against the wall and tearing off his right arm in the process. The Dortian captain wins the battle and manages to open Haruto's core with his hands, trying to transfer all that energy to his own Valvrave afterward. But due to the fight, he ends up overloading and has to retreat along with his army, which at that moment is losing the battle elsewhere. Jor, which was a peaceful country until days ago, appeared to have military technology extremely superior to that of world powers. Arriving on the moon, the students spend 2 months there, achieving a bit of peace. Shoko has become the leader of Jor's group of representatives, and the Valvrave pilots are considered true heroes by the population, with Haruto being, moreover, a global symbol of resistance against Dortian oppression. But fearing he might lose control again, he asks to be locked in a monitored room during that time. Rukino, seeing her friend in that state, asks why they are keeping him locked up like a rat. Elf and the professor respond that he himself had asked for it, and he agrees with them, looking at his friend. Worried about him, she even returns later to try to help him, but he refuses and runs away, afraid of hurting his friend as he had done before. He is found by Elf, who appears in front of him, saying that he had placed a tracker on his body before all that. Elf says that the Valvraves no longer have energy to function for some reason, and that his losses of control over his own mind could be directly linked to all of this. Elf explains to Haruto about the conversation he had with the professor, where the two concluded that the Valvraves operated using as fuel the smallest particles of information called runes. Because, just as all matter in the universe is made up of atoms, all information is made up of runes, which include DNA, speech, emotions, and memories. And the only things in the universe that contain these runes are human beings. Therefore, Elf suspects that Haruto is somehow collecting runes for the Valvraves. And that is actually why he was attacking people, possibly making him a traitor. Elf pulls out a knife and asks Haruto to end his life right there, not wanting to risk that the boy might just be an enemy infiltrator, showing even to Haruto that it is the most correct choice in a wartime situation. Haruto can't find arguments to defend himself. While thinking about his friends, he realizes that he is no longer willing to live as before and asks what would happen to his robot if he were no longer alive. Elf responds sincerely, saying they would simply replace the weapon's pilot, as they still need to use it in future war scenarios. Haruto then decides he will continue living, realizing that nothing would change with or without his presence, saying he just doesn't want to see someone else suffering in his place with what he deals with daily, showing that he will carry that burden alone. The two make an agreement that Haruto will feed what they called the curse only with Elf's body, sharing the risk they both possess by trusting each other. Haruto then bites Elf's body, which instantly reactivates all the Valvraves and confirms his unique connection with the weapons of war. Having regained their robots, the students prepare to continue their reconnaissance mission, aiming to reach Earth with the Valvraves. Leaving their module parked on the moon, they plan to rescue their families and the researchers who belong to Jor. In the midst of this, they also plan to discover something new about the war machines. He reunites with his friends, and they finally meet their new partner Akira. Some of them comment that she was the girl who had hacked the country's national education system a few years earlier. They then listen to the instructions that Elf and their teacher have prepared, explaining how they will land on the planet safely. Satomi, who is Akira's brother, receives a call coming through on a radio frequency that simulates that of Module 77. He answers it, which inadvertently provides Dorsha with the information that their ship has left the moon, leading them to attack as soon as the group approaches Earth. To protect her brother, Akira jumps toward the attack launched by the Army's new combat ship. She steals Inuzuka's shield and blocks the shot, but in doing so, she distances herself from the main ship and overloads her mecha, which begins to fall into Earth's orbit on an unplanned trajectory, unable to move any further. The engineers of Jor contact Haruto, who is witnessing all of this, and ask if he wants to test a new combat device. This device attaches to his right arm with some iron plates, reducing its temperature and providing thermal support, allowing him to move even after overloading. He uses this to destroy the enemy ships in a single strike and propels himself toward his companion, declaring that he can't leave her behind. Connecting the two Valvraves, he also attempts to dissipate her overload. He succeeds initially, but the test equipment explodes, leaving them both on a collision course with Earth. Desperate, Akira's brother shouts over the radio to the entire unit that they can't abandon his sister, forcibly changing their route. She takes advantage of the energy drop caused by Haruto's rescue attempt to hack into Dorsha's tracking system. This allows them to try to rescue the two and re-enter the planned route if everything goes well. However, they need an efficient pilot like Elf for this to work. Despite his reluctance, Elf agrees to help, enabling them to recover Haruto and Akira. But upon landing on Earth, Elf communicates that he was unable to get back onto the original route, causing their group to unintentionally crash directly into Dorshan territory. Landing in enemy territory, they discuss how they will find a way to reach Jor's territory by land. They decide to send Rukino and Akira into the enemy army to infiltrate them, leading the enemy soldiers into an ambush where he, Inuzuka, and Yamada will be positioned and ready to face the entire local army. With the plan set in motion, he heads toward his Valvrave and runs into his friend Marie, who offers to help him repair some parts of the Valvrave before the combat begins. The two work together to fix the Valvrave, and he steps away from her to talk with other companions. He discovers that his friends have successfully executed their part of the plan and are already returning. He runs toward the mecha, but realizes that in the short time he was away, Marie has entered the cockpit of his robot, preventing him from acting at the crucial moment. Meanwhile, Yamada and Inuzuka initiate the ambush, launching a series of direct attacks that hit the Dorshan army's Ideal Bloom ship head-on. But because Haruto didn't appear at the right moment, their plan fails, leaving their group at a complete disadvantage in the battle. To make matters worse, an unknown mecha appears and tears off Yamada's arm. This mecha had been built by Dorsha after they previously captured one of the Valvraves. Unable to help his friends at such a critical time, Haruto asks Marie what she is doing. She confronts him, expressing doubt about whether she can truly trust him, citing what she had seen earlier and demanding explanations. She explains that she noticed something strange about him in the last battle, where he had regenerated from a facial wound in a matter of minutes, as if he were no longer human. But before he can say anything, Elf appears and shoots the girl straight in the head, stating that Haruto needs to follow the plan exactly as he had ordered. He adds that Marie, now aware of the Valvrave's side effects, could cause turmoil in the future, so it was better to execute her. However, as the two are arguing, the girl heals the wound on her head, mysteriously coming back to life right in front of them. The two try to figure out why the girl survived, while Rukino calls Elf to inform him that some members of his former squad are also searching for them in the caves, adding yet another problem to solve, which forces him to detonate some bombs planted underground in the mountain. The explosion ends up catching all three of them, who become trapped in different locations. Haruto, now unable to reach the Valvrave, can no longer help his friends. This prompts Elf to order Marie to take over the battle in Haruto's absence. She activates the Valvrave and discovers, along with Elf, that she had been the test pilot of those weapons during their development phase. The runes that the Valvraves used for energy were the memories of those who piloted them. And because of this, she could no longer recall her oldest memories, as they had all been consumed. Nearly devoid of memories with her friends, she weighs everything and decides to help in the battle anyway, even if it cost her the remaining runes her memory still holds. She appears on the battlefield wielding even more energy than Haruto. Haruto, surprised that someone is using his mecha, wonders who is piloting the Valvrave as he watches her decimate all the enemy ships. As he looks up at the sky, he reunites with Elf, who explains that Marie was actually the original pilot of the Valvrave, which is why she is fighting in his place. He tries to communicate with the girl piloting his mecha, but unfortunately, he notices that his friend has no memories left, unable to recognize him for some reason. Attempting to help his friend remember who she was, the only thing he can do is watch as she uses the overloaded sword to cause an explosion of catastrophic magnitude. This final attack devastates both the enemy army and the remainder of her mind, resulting in the girl's death after saving their lives. Because of all the information he and Elf had obtained from Marie, the boy begins to have nightmares where he dreams of losing all his memories just like she did. until he can't remember anything at all. This leaves him deeply shaken, to the point where he can't even pilot his Valvrave as he normally would the next day. Elf explains that the Dortian Royal Rebel Army had contacted the Jor group via radio, offering assistance to the invading group because they share a common enemy. The assistance from the local rebel army would be provided if they could manage to destroy a military submarine called Phantom. This was a ship that didn't even appear in Dortia's records, with its creation and purpose still unknown. Dividing their squad into two groups, Akira and Yamada are tasked with rescuing Rukino, who was still infiltrated among the enemy troops, while Elf and Haruto went to find and destroy the submarine. Upon infiltrating it, they come across an unknown symbol that belonged neither to the Dortian army nor to the rebels. Inside the submarine, Haruto faces dozens of people having their runes forcibly extracted, being used merely as energy generators for something greater. Elf observes this and comments that the advanced technology that had been discovered by Jor's researchers apparently wasn't exclusive to them, and that Dortia also kept that knowledge secret for some unknown reason. At that moment, the two hear cannon fire outside and realize they need to reunite with their allies nearby. Haruto, showing that he is ready to retaliate, is stopped by Elf, who asks someone else at the operations center to pilot the boy's machine, saying that Haruto is no longer fit to operate it because he is emotionally fragile. Elf explains that he decided this because, after discovering what had happened to Marie, Haruto had become reluctant to use his Valvrave again, fearing he might end up dying as well. Because of that, he could no longer trust the boy to give his all in battle. But Haruto explains that, in fact, he didn't want to use the Valvrave because he was worried about what would happen if someone else had to take his place. Deciding to regain his composure, he returns to the front lines of combat, destroying both the Dortian army and the submarine. He shows no fear in his eyes as he ensures the mission's success. Returning to their base, he and his group discuss the possibility of Module 77 being attacked by Dortia in the meantime, even while stationed in the neutral environment of the moon. They decide they need to rescue the people who had been forcibly taken by the army. They wanted to discover what was happening in their country so they could act more effectively from then on. Haruto becomes excited because he was about to talk to his father after a long time if this mission succeeded. One of Kane's main allies appears and reveals herself to be part of the monarchist army. She goes to meet with him and his unit to deliver the supplies promised by the rebels. Before leaving, the woman asks if there is someone named Michael in their unit. Elf, who is beside Haruto, reveals that this was actually his own name before joining the army. He explains that the only person who knew that name was an old friend of his, Princess Liselot. This makes Elf realize that she might be in danger, so he decides to rush to protect her, abandoning Haruto's group and revealing that this girl was the real reason he had been fighting alongside him all this time. His group tries to call Elf back so they can proceed according to their plans, but Haruto understands his motivations and asks everyone to leave Elf alone, since he also had his own reasons to fight. Haruto decides to continue his mission, finding the people of Jor who had been imprisoned on Earth, while Akira hacked into the main system to support him. Upon arriving there, Haruto asks the scientists if they recognize his father's name. They lead him to the man, making Haruto realize that things would not be as he had imagined. When he meets his father, he discovers that his father actually works as a scientist who sees his son merely as a successful experiment. He reveals that Haruto had been prepared in a secret project with infinite monetary funds, aiming to create a new form of life, with Haruto being part of this new step in human evolution. His father reveals several secrets about Jor, and Haruto discovers that all the adults there were actually military personnel. Moreover, the students who went to Module 77 had been specially prepared to pilot the Valvraves. Feeling angry upon discovering the truth, Haruto ends up punching his own father, promising that he would destroy everything the man had built, in the name of the people and friends who died without any of them caring, concluding his rescue mission with a bitter taste in his mouth. With his mission completed, Haruto now needed to escape the ongoing attack, taking down some enemies who appeared before him. He ends up encountering Elf, who had managed to save his friend, Princess Liselot, but was currently cornered. He helps his ally rescue the princess, and as the two flee together, she reveals that she is a Magius who had betrayed her own race. Because of this, she had been held captive there. She tells them the story of how the Magius are an alien race that came to Earth 100 years ago, needing to steal the bodies of animals and humans because they lacked a physical form. Recalling the conversation with his father, Haruto realizes that the scientists had unknowingly built an artificial physical body for the Magius to use, while they were stealing runes from the pilots to obtain more energy. But with no time to ponder all of this, he regroups with his friends to make their escape. Unfortunately, Dortia's offensive is very strong, and Liselot, wanting to help her friend Elf, decides to use what remains of her energy to propel their rocket back to the moon. This allows Haruto and his friends to escape, but she perishes in the process, her body consumed from within by the overexertion. Before dying, she asks Haruto not to tell Elf the truth about her race or that she had chosen to sacrifice herself to save them. Breaking free from Earth's orbit, he and his companions manage to intercept an attack that was heading toward their country in space, and they safely land in Jor. Haruto finally returns the scientists to their families on solid ground. but he no longer seems to care much about any of it. Even though the boy had succeeded in his mission, he couldn't stop thinking about things going wrong. He also discovers that Rukino had not managed to meet up with them and had been left behind on Earth. Observing the whole situation and discussing it with his companions, he realizes that he needs to devise a plan to defeat the organization called Magius once and for all. He tells everyone to try to manage without Elf's help, who was emotionally shattered after nearly dying in the last battle to save the girl who sacrificed herself, allowing them to escape from Earth. He meets again with Shoko, who had become an excellent diplomatic leader of the country, successfully forging trade agreements with Eris and several other nations. She is planning to impose economic sanctions against their enemy to force them to negotiate at the table. But the two are interrupted by the Magius group in a sudden worldwide broadcast. The Magius convene, commenting that the meeting between Liselot and the pilots from the country of Jor could not become public knowledge, deciding that they would have to remove them from the main stage by force, exposing their captured companion live. The Magius, disguised in human bodies, display Rukino tied up on a giant screen. Even after suffering a fatal wound, she is still able to regenerate. They reveal that the human race has beings from another world among them, with their planet invaded by an alien race. They ask humanity to unite against the threat emerging from Module 77 of the country of Jor, placing targets on the backs of the Valvrave pilots. Watching all of this, Haruto begins to realize that the Magius are an organization with people all over the world, capable of even forging false evidence against Jor while controlling the global media, using the bodies of well-known and important people worldwide. His friends, who were watching everything by his side, try to explain that it could all be a misunderstanding, but their attempt fails when one of them is struck directly in the head. A shootout begins, where several students are targeted by the new alliance of Eris with Dorsha, who have decided to unite forces against Module 77. He abandons Shoko at the scene and joins the other Valvrave pilots, who are also being attacked in space while trying to protect Module 77. They fight as they attempt to flee from the moon. Haruto intercepts a direct attack from one of Dorsha's mechas appearing in space, throwing it backward. Yamada manages to help him by grabbing the enemy's weapon, but ends up receiving a kick afterward. Akira also appears, but is hit in the head as her enemy fires a cannon shot in sequence, but Inusuka manages to block it with his shield, counterattacking afterward. In the midst of the confrontation, some ships appear trying to support the Dorshan army's mecha, but the boy quickly gets rid of them, causing his memory to start erasing some more recent memories. At that moment, his support base makes a call saying they are also being attacked and need help. He rushes there to assist, worried about Shoko, who is also at the location, but discovers that it was a trap set by the students to make him return inside Module 77 because the students had believed the story the international media had exposed about Rukino and their country. His friends had now lost trust in him and asked if Haruto could at least prove that he was human. Seeing his former allies pointing weapons at him, calling him an alien invader, he tries to resolve the situation through dialogue but ends up being shot in the heart. He gets up after the shot, inadvertently proving to everyone that he really was no longer human and that the things reported in the broadcast were true. Shoko, seeing this, accepts the facts and also tells him that he was no longer one of them, obliged, as the nation's representative, to expel her best friend from the module along with the other Valvraves in the name of the nation, making him realize that, besides his already complicated situation, he had now lost the trust of the person he loved most, being considered by her as an enemy of humanity as well. Shoko and the students accept agreements to ally with Eris against the Valvraves, preparing to hand over Haruto and Elf to them, leaving the two on the surface of the moon to be captured by Dorsha's ships. But the world power, not wanting to risk possible infiltrators leaving the country, reveals that their real plan was to destroy Jor completely, without saving any of the students, firing their ships at the module. Inusuka turns on his transmission radio and reminds everyone of his reasons for fighting there, saying that even if he is called a scoundrel, he will protect the people he still cares about at all costs. He throws his shields to Yamada while deciding to use his own Valvrave to block one of the enemy ship's cannon shots, which would have killed all the people inside the module, managing to open an escape route and buying time for everyone to flee. Haruto can only watch his friend die from inside a capsule, literally unable to do anything else, while hearing Inuzuka say that the story between him and Shoko couldn't end in such a sad way, sacrificing his life so that the two could try to resolve things later. And before departing, Inuzuka asks Haruto if he still loves Shoko. Even though he was already starting to lose some of his recent memories with her, he affirms that he does. This allows his friend, who had helped him so much, to at least die with a smile, faithfully believing he made the right choice by trusting him to resolve everything. After being stranded on the surface of the moon, he tries to find a way to escape, asking for Elf's help. However, Elf, having lost his reason to fight, isn't willing to do anything to survive. He hears Elf telling him not to try anything either, because everyone he knew had turned their backs on him. Even the girl he loved had done so. Elf mentions the monster he had become, capable of even killing her father in one of the previous confrontations against Dorsha. Not understanding anything, he asks Elf what he's talking about. Elf begins to tell him the whole story. During one of the attacks, Dorsha had tried to win the confrontation differently. They called Jor's base during the battle and showed Shoko that her father, the former minister, was being held hostage. They informed them that if they didn't hand over all their Valvraves, they would execute him right there. She had to choose between saving her father by giving up the fight or ordering her best friend, who had promised to save him, to destroy the entire fleet, which would also result in her father's death. Unable to make a decision, she could only watch his attack being launched with tears in her eyes as her father died. Hearing all this, he begins to lose control again, blaming Elf for being the real culprit of everything and all the wrong decisions his country had made up to that point. He charges at Elf with a punch, but Elf dodges the blow, grabbing his arms while delivering a kick to his back in the same motion. Unable to defeat him in a straightforward fight, Haruto tries to shake Elf emotionally, just as Elf had done moments before. He reveals the truth about Lieselot, his dear friend, who was actually one of the Magius and had been turned into a prisoner for being a traitor to her race. She had done this with the idea of trying to unify them all instead of watching her people wage war against humans. Upon hearing this, Elf charges at him, unable to believe what he's hearing as he confronts reality. The two begin to vent everything they had bottled up inside to each other. They argue as an extremely balanced fight ensues. Haruto keeps getting hit on one side, while Elf relentlessly attacks on the other. After taking out their frustrations on each other, with nothing left to hide, they decide to unite once again. Now knowing the true story of his friend, Elf decides to fight for the dream she protected until her death. After a long time, he rises again and starts thinking with Haruto about how they will escape together alive. A Dortian ship appears ready to fire at them, and facing it, they decide to create a new nation side by side, where everyone could live together without more wars. But the first step was to reveal the true identity of the Magius to regain Jor's trust. Rukino, who had managed to free herself for some mysterious reason, appears and rescues the two from the enemy ships, showing that luck was now on their side. He returns to Module 77 and meets with Shoko, intending to retrieve his Valvrave. She informs him that they cannot stay in the country because they have not yet been able to publicly prove their innocence. Haruto notices that his friend is trying not to cry for some reason upon seeing him again while asking all of them to leave. The Valvrave system then reports to him that Shoko had entered his cockpit and discovered through some recordings that he had sacrificed his humanity to pilot the ship and avenge her death, believing he had seen her killed in the crossfire on the first day of the Dortian invasion. With that, he looks at his friend again, and without saying a word, they understand each other. The boy takes up his weapon of war, promising to expose the truth about the world while holding back tears in his eyes, wishing he could have just one more peaceful day in his life after all this is over. He departs and reunites with the group of Valvrave pilots, who decide to stake their lives in the next confrontation, appearing by surprise amidst the Dortian forces and blowing up their ships in the blink of an eye with Haruto's attacks. Using the 4 Valvraves they had left, they try to force their way through the entire fleet by brute strength, while he manages to aim his overload attacks at the main ships with the help of equipment previously created by his former engineering team. But with few memories left, he realizes he won't be able to keep using his attacks for much longer. Rukino appears at his side, having noticed that he is reaching his limit, promising to support him so he won't die fighting alone. She charges ahead, holding off 2 fleets simultaneously by herself so he wouldn't expend his energy there, but ends up having her legs blown off by enemy ships. Akira and Yamada take advantage of the opening in the enemy formation and reach the main ship. Akira begins hacking their satellite, while Yamada provides cover alone, using the shield that Inuzuka had thrown to him before exploding. Seeing his friends fighting with everything they have, he remembers that he needs to fight for them to end the war, so that no one would need to use a Valvrave to protect themselves from anything. Everyone there had trusted him, and to prove to Shoko that he really wasn't an enemy of humanity, he leaves Rukino behind and helps his group again in covering Akira. One of Dorsha's main ships appears, leading Yamada into a hand-to-hand confrontation. He grabs the arms of the Dortian mecha while aiming his shoulder cannon at its shields. The enemy raises the robot's feet, dodging his shot. In doing so, the soldier uses the hole made by Yamada's own weapon to prop up his cannon, catching him by surprise with a point-blank shot. As Akira informs them that she has managed to hack the enemy satellite, she then looks up and sees her friend Yamada split in half, but happy to have succeeded in the mission. Yamada tells them not to worry about him, as he had already achieved the revenge he so desired, and now he needed to go visit a friend named Nabu, a student who had been killed in the first invasion by the army, being torn apart limb by the Dortian attack. His Valvrave explodes, ending his life. Having gained control of the satellite, the group only needs to wait for Elf, who had infiltrated the Dortian army and discovered that his former platoon had also uncovered the whole truth about their commander Kane being one of the Magius, reuniting forces once again. They invade the place where a meeting between the 2 leaders of Dorsha and Eris is taking place, an encounter that is being broadcast live to the whole world, providing the population with details about the unexpected alliance of the 2 powers. Elf shoots all the escort soldiers while swiping right the throat of Dorsha's supreme commander. The entire world's population watches the scene horrified, becoming even more surprised when they see the commander's neck regenerate afterward. revealing to the world that the man who had accused Yor of being the cradle of an alien invading race was actually one of the real invaders of planet Earth. Akira had hacked the satellite and prevented the Magius' desperate attempt from shutting the broadcast down. Despite all their efforts, the transmission continued, and the entire population discussed the unfolding events online. The Magius used their influence to try to control the narrative through the media. They bought out powerful news outlets to manipulate the story, twisting it repeatedly over time. Meanwhile, Kane appeared in his Valvrave, confronting Haruto head-on. He conjured a crystal of energy and aimed it directly at Haruto. Haruto dodged the attack while firing his cannon at the captain. Kane closed the distance and struck Haruto's face, attempting to slice him in half. Haruto blocked the attack and tried to land a point-blank shot with his other arm. Kane grabbed his hand before he could fire, crushing part of Haruto's robot and causing an explosion. One of Elf's former comrades arrived to support him in battle. Discovering that Kane was one of the Magius, he confronted his old leader and unleashed a barrage of cannon shots at him. Taking advantage of the distraction, he tried to attack Kane with his scythe. Kane effortlessly destroyed its chains, making Haruto realize that none of his previous attacks had been effective. Haruto fired again at Kane, who deftly dodged. Charging forward, Haruto aimed another direct blow at the soldier's cockpit, but Kane repelled him with a burst of energy, forcing him back into his module. At that moment, X-Ines decided to sacrifice himself to damage Kane's Valvrave in any way he could. By doing so, he managed to immobilize one of Kane's arms. Haruto took advantage of X-Ines' help and got back up. He met with Elf, who told him that as a mere novice in military combat, Haruto couldn't defeat Kane alone. Hearing this, Haruto asked for Elf's help. They decided to fight together, with Elf allowing Haruto to take control of his body, merging their combat skills with the power of the Valvraves. Kane, having freed himself from X-Ines, advanced toward them to continue the fight. Haruto launched a quick attack, using both his sword and scythe to strike from both sides. Noticing the difference in their movements, Kane realized that his former pupil and Haruto were now fighting together against him, and that their close combat abilities had improved significantly. The soldier fired a beam directly at Haruto's chest, closing in and aiming an attack at his right side. Haruto dodged and put some distance between them. Kane is unwilling to give him any respite and fires again. Haruto is forced to block the attack, which pushes him backward onto a bridge. Kane begins to explain that the Magius Council isn't, in fact, an organization with evil plans. He claims that humans were responsible for the conflict between the two races. The Magius came to Earth seeking peaceful coexistence, but humanity decided to attack them because they saw them as invaders. He explained that the legends and myths known worldwide were merely chronicles of his people's suffering over the ages. Because of this, when they took control of the most influential figures within human society, they chose to remain hidden, fearing to rekindle humanity's fear. To keep humanity from descending into chaos and panic, they erased memories in exchange for energy. In Kane's view, they were the true heroes of the entire story. After hearing all of this, Haruto said that it was simply a justification the Magius used. He decides to continue the battle outside the module to avoid civilian casualties, leading Kane to pursue him into space once again. In the void of space, he evades another of Kane's blasts. Kane seizes Haruto's hands, striking him repeatedly, and unleashes blades from his own body, each one piercing Haruto. Kane opens his core again and attempts to drain Haruto's mecha of energy, just as he had done in their first battle. But Haruto uses every memory he has left to fuel a surge of energy, letting out a furious scream. He finally uncovers the truth. The Magius had never pursued peace, but had always used their powers to control everyone, sacrificing innocent lives for their true objectives. He raises his sword and attacks, clashing his blade against Kane's. Each strike he now launched cost him a precious memory of his friends. Haruto charges forward with a frontal attack, wielding his two melee weapons. Kane dodges and counters with a swift strike. Haruto evades and leaps onto the captain's back. Spinning in the vacuum of space, he slices Kane's body in half. Kane takes the hit, exposing a gap on his right side. Seizing the opportunity, Haruto delivers another powerful strike, severing Kane's arm. Grasping his core with both hands, Haruto fully energizes his Valvrave. He drives his sword through Kane's chest, causing him to explode. With the battle over, Haruto had learned the whole truth, but ironically, he had no memories left. Elf regained control of his body and tried to help his friend. But there was nothing he could do except watch the boy who had bravely fought alongside him and become his friend die. In the end, Haruto never had the chance to explain what he had discovered. He realized too late that he had been used all along as a mere tool of the Magius, chosen and manipulated because he was an innocent, kind-hearted boy who always tried to solve everything on his own. He never